Hello, good morning, and welcome to the latest in City Magazine's series of free-to-attend webinars. I'm John Thornton, editor of City, and your host for today's session. Today's webinar, which is sponsored by Charles Indirect and Gilbarco Veeder-Root, will examine the current and future state of EV charging infrastructure in the UK. Why? Because it's such a hot button topic right now, with multiple reports in the specialist press and mainstream media claiming that the country's provision falls woefully short of what's required to support a mass rollout of electric vehicles ahead of the UK government's proposed 2035 ban on the sale of all new petrol, diesel and hybrid vehicles. But is the situation really as grave as some believe? Or is the UK actually on track to deliver a sufficient and robust national network of EV chargers? To help answer this question, we've assembled a panel of industry experts comprising those tasked with supplying the technology and local authorities at the forefront of the transition. Today's panel comprises Alan Reid, National Sales Manager at Charles Indirect, and his colleague Ian Cowham, Area Sales Manager for London and South East England. Graham Tunks, European Business Development Manager at Gilbarco Veeder-Root. Shamala Evans, Senior Programme and Project Manager for Transportation and Innovation at Coventry City Council. Sandy Tung, Programme Manager for Sharing Cities at Greater London Authority. And Tim Middleton, Transport Innovations Programme Manager at Kent County Council. Together, we will discuss how the issue differs city to city, region to region, and look at what needs to be done at borough, town, and even parish council levels to help support the increase in EV charging provision. We'll also examine what kinds of technologies and support are required to further unlock infrastructure expansion and investment. Now, before we begin, I'd just like to encourage viewers to ask questions throughout the webinar via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I'll pose as many of these questions as possible to our panelists in the time available following the end of the discussion. Also, a recording of this webinar will be available to view at citymagazine.co.uk from tomorrow, and a write-up published in the November 2020 issue of City Magazine. And with that, I'll now hand over to our sponsors, who will start today's webinar with a couple of brief presentations. Alan, if we could start with you, please.
Okay, John, thanks very much. Good morning to you all. I'll just bring up the screen that I am going to share with you. And there it is. Hopefully now you are looking at a photo of an EV charger, charging unit, and a small feeder pillar just off to the right-hand side there. Can everyone see that okay? Yep. Okay, lovely. Good morning to you all. Alan Reid is my name. I'm National Sales Manager from Charles Indirect. And assisting me today with this presentation is, as John just said, my colleague Ian Cowham, and he is the Area Sales Manager for London and the South East. What we're going to be talking about for the next 15-20 minutes is a brief presentation. It's about the feeder pillars that are used for the part of the infrastructure for EV charger units. Right, let's just bring that forward. Just bear with me a second. Okay, here we go. So just a brief introduction in a minute about EV cars and the infrastructure in the UK. Then we're going to give you an overview about the feeder pillars, and that will include types of feeder pillars that are available, the applications of those feeder pillars, how one of those feeder pillars was incorporated into a project in Lower Marsh in London, and then more specifically about the feeder pillars and how they are used for EV charging, and that will include types of plugs and sockets, the types of charge for the vehicles, and therefore the types of loads that are created by those charge. We'll also consider some of the points for when considering what type of feeder pillar you need to be thinking about for your EV chargers, and then we'd be looking for information from yourselves, the customer, with giving us accurate information when we're actually making a quotation for you for those type of feeder pillars. We'll talk about how the 18th edition IET wire regs affects EV charging. Briefly talk about testing procedure and documentation, and then my colleague, as I said, Ian Cowan, he's online as well to take any questions at the end of this presentation. Okay, where are we with EV charging in the UK? Well, basically, the charging infrastructure, as I see it, is based on the following three facts. The sales of diesel and petrol cars banned by 2035. And we can see that in such that we've seen in cities, in the advertising for cars, that we're seeing more and more often now on our TV screens, the likes of BMW, Mini, Renault, all the main car manufacturers are actually showing us more and more of their advertising of their electric vehicles that they wanting us to purchase in the near future, because they know for a fact that those diesel and petrol cars are not going to be around after 2035. So their focus is on electric vehicles. We also know major UK cities are looking to implement plans. They're not thinking about it, they're actually implementing plans. So I think about London, and they've got their exclusion zone for vehicles used in the heart of the city. But what a lot of people may not realize that is that exclusion zone, the ultra low emission zone, is going to extend out to the northern and circular parts of the circular road around London. So that area is going to become much wider in the near future by 2021. And so it's going to affect many more people in the near future.
And the interesting thing with London as well, not all the boroughs, because some will obviously have the same ideas of what they want, but there is no sort of common aim to how they're going to charge cars. Is it in columns? Is it in with feeder pillars? Sorry, just cutting across the air, Alan, just in case anyone wants to.
Yeah, that's a good point. Birmingham, think about Birmingham. They're actually already implementing plans that they're going to be banned on petrol and diesel cars in city centre at certain times of day. Same with Bristol. We know that Bristol is looking by 2020, and that is to say next year, Bristol is going to be stopping cars going through the heart of their city because if you have a diesel car, you will need to actually drive around the city, which is a big diversion if you live in that local area. So for those reasons, there's lots of things that are pushing us towards getting electric cars. And then finally, OLEV, the Office for Low Emission Vehicles, they have an ambition, zero emissions up to 2050. But bringing that even further forward, this advertisement I saw more recently, it shows there quite clearly by 2030 that the Contractors Association, Electrical Contractors Association, are throwing their weight behind the plan. They want that to be brought forward to 2030. So there's a lot of reasons why we need that infrastructure in place to be able to supply electrical power to those electric vehicles. Well, this is where we are at the moment. I actually went on to, if you have an electric car, you may be familiar with this view on this screen. I went on to a Zap map this morning, and Zap map tells you exactly where all the electrical vehicle charging points are throughout the UK. And as of today, there are 19,804 devices, 19,804 charging units in the UK that are in operation. That equates to 34,571 connectors. So each charging unit is going to have one or two or three different types of plugs and sockets on there for you to be able to charge your electric car, depending on what sort of vehicle you're driving. So that's where we are at the moment. The devices, they could be slow, fast, rapid, or ultra rapid chargers. You can see back in 2011, there really weren't very many electric vehicle charging points around here in the UK. Come forward to 2015, we can see that that's gone up to 10,000. So, you know, we're seeing progress. Today, we are, as I said, at 34,571 connectors. So there are those plugs and sockets for you to be able to plug into around the UK. So that's quite a leap from 2015 up to 2020. However, if I go to the next view, these are the statistics that were supplied to me. During 2019, additional 2.9 vehicles were registered for the first time in the UK. of those 2.9 vehicles, almost 80,000 of those vehicles were ultra-low emission vehicles. Ultra-low emission vehicles being vehicles that emit 75 grams per kilometre or less of CO2. So we're talking about electric vehicles, we're talking about plug-in hybrids, and we're talking about range extending vehicles. That is a vehicle with a small engine that will allow you to charge up your battery to continue your journey using the battery only. We're not referring to hybrid vehicles. So 80,000 were registered for the first time in the UK in 2019. That took us up to 38.7 million licensed vehicles in the UK. So that admittedly does include lorries, trucks, buses, as well as cars. But really what I'm trying to say is, of those 33 charging points that we already have here in the UK for our electric vehicles, if you start to look at what we're trying to achieve by 2030 to try and replace those 38.7 million vehicles, that number's growing all the time. We do have still a big job on our hands to be able to achieve that. The feeder pillars themselves, they play a big role with the EV chargers because you are going to very often need some sort of feeder pillar to supply the electrical power to the EV charging units, but they also contain the electrical protection inside of them. And these are just some of the examples, the dimensions of the sort of feeder pillar you may be wishing to consider when you are choosing a suitable size feeder pillar. It could be different colors, different types of hinges, different sorts of locking mechanisms. You may want to use a combination lock. You may want to have it with a metal cladding around it. There are many, many different ways that feeder pillar can be shaped and designed and disguised if people want it to be a bit more unobtrusive. It could be you want it with some sort of heritage finish on it so it blends in with other street furniture in your particular city. So
and the ones on the right,
well,
and the ones on the right there also protect the pedestrians as well. There's something in the region of 200 kilos, so they've got a dual usage with the bollards there. I think that was Epsom Market we put those ones in.
Absolutely, yeah. This one here getting a little bit larger now. This particular feeder pillar here is we worked with a consultant called Arup, and it's for a project B-Sky-B campus. And for this particular feeder pillar, we have in fact been requested to leave space inside of there because they're looking to extend the project that they have currently have, and they want to use that for the possible use of having electric vehicles. So that thought is already there in the consultant's mind, either of using it now or future-proofing it so that it can be in the future. This particular project here, this feeder pillar, rather large feeder pillar, it started off being about 2 meters high, but then the architect realized actually he wanted it at the same height as the wooden fence behind it. So it went from being 2 meters high down to being 2 meters wide. That's being used for electrical power for street lighting. It's already also being used for these small in-ground units in the photo that you can see there. They're used for market traders to be able to plug into or for eventing purposes. And of course, they're being used to supply electrical power for EV charging units as well.
What that does highlight that not all feeder pillars have to be a standard size. This was totally bespoke, and that service is available. So if it's got to go into a corner, or as long as we've got the actual space for the DNO and for the equipment that you need to install or anybody needs to install in it, they can be made bespoke. So it's not just a matter of littering the countryside with lots of static boxes that are on show for everyone. So there are alternatives.
Yeah, that's right. Very true. Project here, Lower Marsh. This is a street in London, just behind Waterloo Station. And this feeder pillar here, it was being used for supply of electrical power to these in-ground units along the length of Lower Marsh Street. And what's significant about the feeder pillar here is on the left-hand side of the feeder pillar, you have your main supply coming in, and the DNO fuses an electrical meter. That will be for the electrical authorities to be able to access, whereas the section on the right-hand side is your distribution boards that are supplying those in-ground units along the length of Lower Marsh Street. So we're controlling access that only electrical authorities are able to access the left-hand side, whereas the market manager is able to access the right-hand side to control the use of the in-ground units. Dimensions, this is sort of information that will be coming to you if a quotation was to be requested. A drawing would be supplied with it, giving you the basic dimensions of the feeder pillar, the components inside of the feeder pillar, the main components, schematics, wiring diagrams, and even the size of the cable glands that are coming in and going out of that feeder pillar. So it's a good level of information there for you. And then finally, not just stainless steel and galvanized steel, but GRP, glass reinforced plastic, is also a feeder pillar that can be considered and is used for the supply of electrical power to your EV charging units. Okay, first 20 slides have been pretty much an overview about the EV infrastructure and feeder pillars in general. Talking more specifically about EV charging, this large feeder pillar that you can see on the photo here, this was built for a project up in Stockton. And if you look at the doorway behind on the photo there, you can see this is a pretty substantial size feeder pillar that was built for this particular project. Inside, we can see the components. There's buzz bars in there, relays, lighting clock modules, time clocks. They're all being used for the supply of street lighting. That's our bread and butter. This is what Charles N Direct is all about, is products suitable for street lighting purposes. So that's its one of its functions. It's to supply the electrical power to the in-ground units that the market traders plug into. And it's being used to supply electrical power for the EV charging units that are around Stockton High Street as well. Now, despite the size of that feeder pillar, the designer has been very clever with the use of colours, that he's taken that rather large feeder pillar and he's tried as best he can to make it rather inconspicuous against the wall of the pub that you can see in the photo there, whereas the EV charging unit is more conspicuous and is easily seen by people wishing to use it, find it, use it and operate it. On this particular feeder pillar is an ABB type feed, on this particular EV charging unit, this is an ABB type, and we've got 3 different types of connectors here, rated at 43 watts, 50 kilowatts and 50 kilowatts. The actual types that are in there are, there is a type 2 plug, which is also referred to as a Mennekes socket. They're commonly used throughout the UK, and they can be single phase or 3-phase. That's the second plug along that you can see there. Then there is also a combination plug in that ABB unit. That is a CCS, combined charging system, and that's where you're making use of the combined use of AC and DC charging to achieve a fast charge. And then finally, the 5th plug along is a CHAdeMO, which is charge to move. It's a DC charging system designed by Japanese car manufacturers, and that was back in 2010. So you're seeing straight away, if you're looking for a electric vehicle charging unit, that you need to be thinking in your mind about the different types of plugs and sockets that are going to be needed to charge those different types of vehicles that are currently on the market. Those are photos of the different of those plugs. So the first one up on the left-hand side is your Mennekes Type 2 plug for AC charging. Now that can be single phase or it can be 3-phase. The bottom photo is your CCS, combined charging system, and that's where we're using the combination of AC and DC to achieve rapid charging. And then on the right-hand side, the photo, you can see there is a socket there, and in fact would take either of those 2 plugs. It would take either the Type 2 Mennekes socket, or it could take the combined charging system. So they're starting to become a little bit more integrated now, that you can actually use one type of plug or the other. But when you talk about the CHAdeMO, the charge to move, this is something completely different. And again, it's emphasizing that when you're going to be looking for an EV charging unit, that you need to consider these different types of plugs and sockets to be able to supply those different types of vehicles on the market at the moment. Types of chargers. I mentioned back in the ZAP map diagram I showed at the beginning that there is slow charging, fast charging, and rapid and ultra rapid charging. These are the definitions of those different types of chargers. Your slow charging is a 3 kilowatt charge, and you're looking to get 80% of your full charge, that's going to take you 6 to 12 hours. So we're looking at a trickle charge, something that's possibly going to be charging overnight. So it could be more suitable for domestic use or for vehicles that are being kept in a compound or a depot where they can be charged overnight, ready to be used the next day. Your fast charging, rated at 7 to 22 kilowatts. This is something a little bit quicker, and you're looking at a charging time of around 1 to 6 hours to get 80% of your full charge. Rapid chargers, now we're talking about larger loads. We're talking about 43 to 50 kilowatts, as we saw on the Stockton project with the ABB charger. And there you're looking at the use of AC and DC charging using those different types of plugs and sockets that I mentioned to you just now. And you're looking around 50 kilowatt rated, and you're looking around an hour to get to 80% of the charge on your vehicle. And then finally, the big boys, the ultra rapid DC chargers. Now they're running at about 100 kilowatts or more, and you're getting the charging time, depending on the capacity of your vehicle, down to just 30 minutes. So there are many, many different types of chargers out there now on the market.
And that would be more suited for service stations where people have got short breaks, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can come in for a coffee. If you've got an ultra rapid charger there and your vehicle's able to take that charge, then you could be coming in for a coffee, use the service station, and then come out, and then it's there, good, ready to go again. This table here on the left-hand side, it really just reinforces everything I've just mentioned to you about slow, fast, rapid, and ultra-rapid charges. On the right-hand side, this is the bit that is also relevant, because what it's saying to you is it depends on the type of supply that you're able to utilize for your particular project. So for example, if you've just got 100 ampere single phase AC supply, well, that would give you the capability to run about 5 slow chargers. If, however, you had a much larger supply coming in of, let's say, 400 amperes, 3-phase AC supply, well, that actually would give you 70 slow chargers, or it would give you 7 to 5 rapid chargers. But just bear in mind, the ultra rapid chargers, even with that large supply coming in, it would still actually only give you the capability to give you just 1 ultra rapid charger. So there's a lot of consideration to be made about what sort of EV chargers you're going to be using, and how much power supply you actually have there to be able to achieve that. So really, it depends on the type of supply coming in, depends on the type of feeder pillar that you're going to be used. In this photo here, this small feeder pillar off to the right-hand side is sufficient to do the job. If we go back to Stockton, we're looking at something that is admittedly supplying street lighting and the in-ground units, but the use of the rapid charger meant that you needed a larger feeder pillar as well to be able to get all the relevant equipment and inside of it. Some points to note when you're thinking about a feeder pillar. This is more for the consultants, and the sort of points that need to be considered is it's not unusual now for us to see an inquiry coming in that that's asking for 250 or 400 ampere supply, and therefore that says to us we could be looking at cables that could be 70 square millimeters up to 300 square millimeters. These are pretty substantial size cables for the contractor to have to terminate into the feeder pillar. Now, therefore, that means we need to be able to help the contractor make it more user-friendly for them. We need to think about larger feeder pillars, because the fuse in it, called the DNO, is going to be larger, because you need more room. When you think of the contractor, you've got a big heavy cable, he's trying to bring it into his feeder pillar. We need to give that person more room to be able to maneuver it, to get it into place so he can terminate that cable into the feeder pillar. And also you need to think about the height of the feeder pillar, because the cables themselves, because they're so substantially thick, they actually need an even larger bending radius. So when we're looking at the feeder pillars, we need to think about those sort of things when we're putting together a design for a feeder pillar. And I think this photo here starts to show you what I'm trying to explain about having more space, about having 500 millimeters underneath this fuse setup here called the DNO cutout. that you need more space for some pretty substantial sized cables. What do we need to know from yourselves, from your consultant, from you, the customer, to be able to make an accurate feeder pillar quotation? First thing, what sort of charge is it going to be? Is it going to be slow, fast, rapid, ultra rapid? If possible, could we have a data sheet? With the data sheet, we can get some relevant information out of it as to what sort of circuit protection may be already inside of that EV charging unit. Because if you already have that protection, electrical protection inside of the EV charging unit, then we don't need to duplicate it into our feeder pillar, because firstly, that's going to make it more expensive. Secondly, it could perhaps cause nuisance tripping because one electrical protection device is sort of working against the other. So it's important that we know if there is any circuit protection inside of there. What sort of supply is coming in? Is it a private supply? Is it single phase? Is it three phase? What about the size of the cable? The earthing arrangement. Well, normally with an EV charging system, they have to be supplied with a TT system. That is to say, an earth spike is there with the EV charging system. But we just need to confirm that. Is that one of the things that we need to know from you? You need to confirm to us what sort of earthing arrangement for your feeder pillar. The cable sizes going out of the feeder pillar. What are the sizes of those? What are the type of those? The enclosures, is it steel? Is it stainless steel? Is it GRP, glass reinforced plastic? There's a lot of detail there, but the devil really is in detail. But I'm pleased to say that if an inquiry was to come into us, there is a sheet that can be sent out, and it's a simple sheet for the customer to be able to fill in, and they can put in as much information as they possibly can, and then we can take things from there, and we can start to put a design together based on that information we've received. IA regs. The IA regs, of course, have a role to play with EV chargers, and the requirements for EV chargers is, there's a lot of information there, but it's that bottom line that I'm looking at where it says an RCD having a residual operation current not exceeding 30 milliamperes. It's imperative that we have inside of our feeder pillar that protection to protect the EV charging units. However, as I said before, it's very often that RCD is now becoming incorporated into the EV charger itself. So therefore, we can now start looking at using perhaps other types of protections. It could be MCCBs, RCBOs, MCBs. There's different types of electrical protection, even fuses that could perhaps be considered. Even with street lighting, because as I said, street lighting is our bread and butter. Street lighting column itself can be considered as a possible means of supplying electrical power for EV charging. But again, those rules apply from the IA regs that you need some sort of, well, you need an RCD inside of your feeder pillar. And in this case, your feeder pillar is your column. And there is, in fact, a unit that will fit inside of that street column that has all the relevant protection, including the RCD, meaning that the EV charging unit that is on the lamp column itself can be safely used. Test and procedures documentation, just to let you know that everything that leaves our factory, which is in Wincanton, will be tested according to the BS-EN 60439 regulations. They will receive a signed test document, and there will be a copy of that document and all the relevant drawings inside of the feeder pillar itself for the contractor to refer to, and that's all being carried out in our bespoke test bay that we've had built down in our factory in Wincanton. Bang. Ladies and gentlemen, that's my presentation on feeder pillars. A lot of information there. I hope it was interesting for you, and I look forward to taking any questions you may have for me.
Alan, thank you very much for your presentation, and also to you, Ian. We'll circle back to questions a little later on. If we could now move over to Graham Tunks from Gilbarco Vander Root to give his presentation. Graham, over to you.
Thank you. Right, can you see this all okay?
Yep.
Okay. Why is it not making that bigger? There we go. Right. So I'm Graham Tucks, Business Development Manager across Europe for the e-mobility business within Gilbarco Veeder-Root. We have got a Tritium logo there as well because we are a stakeholder in Tritium, which is an EV charger manufacturer, Australian based with 2 other main sites in LA and the other one in Amsterdam. So most people outside of our core business, which is petrol retail, don't know who we are. I kind of think, hey, you know, are you a startup? You're a new company? You know, who are you? So we are actually over 150 years old. We do generally generate $2 billion worth in revenue per year. We are listed on the S&P 500 in the States. As I say, we've got over 5,000 employees across the world. We do actually have quite a lot of companies underneath our umbrella. We do look at mergers and acquisitions quite a lot. Yeah, so we keep moving forward. So as I say, we started off in fuel retail. So way back in 1865 with a very old petrol pump there on the bottom left-hand side. And obviously, you know, we kind of change with the times. So we understand that fueling vehicles is our core business. And obviously, we're now seeing the change in that it's not now petrol and diesel and AdBlue, it's obviously moving in towards electric vehicles. So some of these things you may recognize and not realize that you recognize, but this unit down here that I'm hovering around with my mouse is typically what BP petrol stations use. This one to the right is commonly used by Shell, who's actually our biggest global customer, also Tesco's and also Asda. So you will have known of us, but don't know that you know of us. And with our business segments, we do cover quite a lot. It's not just petrol pumps, it's payment solutions. So, you know, we have 560,000 dispensers around the country, 350,000 outdoor payment terminals. So when you go to Tesco and select pay at pump, that's also what we're operating as well. With commercial and industry, you know, looking after fleets in terms of vans, HGVs, cars. We look after 7.5 million vehicles across the world that have RFID on there with terminals, whether that's fueling out in the public solution or also, say, what we call behind the fence if they're a large enough fleet to own their own fueling solution. And also with e-mobility, which obviously what we're here to talk about, we do actually have over 2,000 DC chargers installed all over the world. Again, in case you haven't realised who Tritium are, if you've heard of Instavolt, so Instavolt just got over 500 chargers in the UK now, but 400 of those are Tritium chargers that you would have seen. And also maybe you've heard of Ionity, which is the big OEM-owned network across Europe. They have 2 providers for electrical equipment, which is ABB and Tritium. And so that you can't distinguish between the 2, they have actually generated their own dispenser unit called a Halo unit. But as I say, we supply them with equipment, but we also provide the maintenance for Ionity in 5 countries at the moment across Europe. And we're literally in the middle of signing the contract to cover the UK as well. So we're not just a case of supplying equipment, we also look after it too. I just kind of like to build out a little bit on part of Alan's presentation there, to give you an idea of what type of charger you may need and where it may be situated. If you're looking to increase range of, say, 120 miles, which is 200 kilometers, this is roughly how long it's going to take you on per charger, should the vehicle be able to take that amount of charge. So, you know, workplace or home chargers, you'd look at, you know, your single phase 7 kilowatt or 3-phase 22. You may then look in towards more public areas for DC 50 and 150. And again, you can see obviously how the time changes. And then 350 kilowatt chargers, again, Ian made this point earlier as well, you're more likely to see those on forecourts because that's more of an en route charger. You're not going to go to a retail park and want to plug into a 350 kilowatt charger to charge in 7 minutes because you're going to be there a lot longer than 7 minutes. So moving forward, this being a little bit slow, this is kind of obviously, you know, a broad overview of what we can do. So in the middle there, you've got the EV charging equipment. What do you need to control that charging equipment? You need a back-end software platform. We also made another stake into Drives this year. Drives is an Israeli company that provides a back-end. They also are heavily invested by Bosch. Bosch are also one of the founding partners of Hubject, which is one of the biggest roaming platforms across Europe. Drives also provides the back end for the Irish company ESB, who are on the Transport for London framework. So again, you may know that you know of Drives, but you don't realise you know of Drives. And I think also ESB are actually working with Coventry as well at the moment, but Shamala may be able to hint on that later on. So then with that back-end platform, you can link to e-roaming platforms. And these are basically platforms that are trying to link different networks and back offices all together so that you can use one card or phone app in order to charge on multiple different networks wherever you may be traveling. And then to go along with that, on the left-hand side, there's also different levels of support, because it's very crucial for EV charging to have support for the driver, because a lot of places where these are, if you're struggling to get a charge on your vehicle, it's not working properly, that's a big problem. You can't just walk down to the local petrol station, get a jerry can, with £10 worth of fuel and pop it up and then get yourself home. It's a big issue. So we have 3 levels of what we call support operations. Level 1 is an initial call center, which is operational 24/7, 365. And that can obviously answer any main initial questions that may be there. We can determine if the plug is not actually properly connected into the car, if there's if the emergency stop button has been pressed, if a charge hasn't been authorized, we can then remote authorize a charge, remote stop a charge. If it's a bit more in-depth issue, maybe within the charger itself, we raise that up into our solution providers. So be that Drives providing the back-end software platform, or Tritium themselves, who have their Pulse network, which connects to their chargers, and they can do a bit of a deeper dive into that. And if it is then a bit more serious and it needs an actual physical visit, then we obviously have field service providers that can do that. We cover many countries, of which I'll touch on just a little bit later. This is our 50 kilowatt charger, the VFill RT. Only 50 kilowatts, that's all it does. It does have a contactless payment terminal, which is right in the middle there, just above the Tritium badge. And obviously linking on to Alan's points earlier in terms of connectors, there's a CCS on the left-hand side and a CHAdeMO on the right-hand side. Simultaneous charging is not available on this unit, so there's literally 1 car per plug. But as I say, you tend to find that hosts like the idea of simultaneous charging, but drivers do not, because they want to get the maximum charge rate that they can. They don't want to be splitting that between each others. USPs about this charger here, it's the standard kind of 2 meter tall with the LED lights in the top there to briefly illuminate all of that. However, it's only 6 inches deep. So the mounting depth is very small. Benefits for that, you don't need a bigger plinth to mount the unit onto. And likewise, it's very lightweight. It only weighs 165 kilos. So you don't actually need a HIAB or crane in order to install one of these. To give you an example, there is another competitor within the UK, has a slightly larger unit than this, that weighs 600 kilos. So, again, in terms of obviously what you need to install that charger, you can actually save money by having something like this. And then the other USP that it has is that it's liquid cooled. So it doesn't have fans, it doesn't have filters, it doesn't have moving parts inside it. What does that mean? Benefit from a host, you can go 5 years without any maintenance on this charger. So again, other chargers that are out there on the market, they do have moving parts, they do need annual maintenance, and you can be looking at £600 to £700 per charger per year for a maintenance contract. Work that out over 5 years, you can save a fair bit of money. Then moving forward to obviously some of these installations, because we do have quite a lot of these around the country and around the world, and they do operate in some vast temperatures. So the middle one there, that's actually in Norway. We have quite a lot of these in Norway because our biggest contract up there is with an oil company called Circle K. So they have a variety of these chargers as well as ultra rapid chargers, and the temperature just regularly go below -30 to -40. These chargers will still operate in that temperature. Likewise, we have them in very hot locations as well. So in the UK, they'll work perfectly fine. We're not going to see anything like that. This is the VFill PK unit. So this is basically what Ionity use, but with a slightly different look to it. And this goes from anywhere from 175 kilowatts up to 475 kilowatts. So there's only really buses that can take 475 so far, so we'll ignore that for the minute. So this is what's called a modular system. So as Alan mentioned earlier, with ultra rapid chargers, you have a much bigger power supply. You're going to have a larger feeder pillar. You're also probably going to have a substation as well on site or very close by. And then what this has is it has a power cabinet and it has a communications cabinet, and then you that have this, the dispenser, which can be mounted up to 100 meters away from the power unit itself with no loss of power. So again, in terms of locating that power things away from, they're a bit more of an eyesore than something like this. So you can mount them the other side of the car park location or petrol forecourt, wherever it may be. And you can upgrade these as well. So if you had, say, 175 kilowatt option, if you want to upgrade that to 350, you don't need to purchase any more actual physical equipment. The top part of the power cabinet has capability for that. So all we would need to do is send an engineer along with the additional power pack, install that into the top part, connect it up and configure it. And in half a day, your charge has gone from 175 to 350. That's all you need to do. Still have contactless payment terminals as well, and they do still have CCS and CHAdeMO as well. Now, CHAdeMO is actually maximum rated to 100 kilowatts, and there's still not really anything in the UK that can take that level. They're still restricted to 50. So if you were looking to purchase one of these and want CCS only, which is like what Ionity do, because only their cars owned by their OEMs have CCS, you can have that, and you don't have the other connector on the left-hand side. Then we're also about to launch, literally very, very shortly, our AC charging offering, which we're calling Amps to Go. This is a Gilbarco own branded charger. Again, with the wall box unit here, single socket, either single phase 7 kilowatt or 3-phase 22, operated via RFID or phone app. You can have a color screen option if you want. Main additional benefit to that is purely for putting company logo on it instead. They are IP54 rated. Sorry, one thing I omitted about the previous Tritium units, they're IP65. There isn't another charger in the world so far at the moment that's actually rated to that level. So again, another USP there. So say these are IP54. You can mount them directly to a wall. There is a pole mount option as well. And then we've also got a pedal stall unit. So where you can see the Amps to Go logo, that's actually the front. So there are twin socket units. Either side has one socket, one screen, RFID, and control units as well. Same thing, 7 kilowatt single phase or 3-phase 22 kilowatt. They do have 2 power inputs, so there's no load balancing. So both sockets can deliver 7 or 22 at the same time to 2 separate cars. Then tying on with that, we're about to launch, our own branded eVerse backend. Again, we can white label this for somebody if they want. So, we've offered this to several major oil companies. So if they want to brand that their own, they can do that. But if it's someone looking to have, a few chargers to start with, they want a backend to connect to, which they can then build as obviously time moves forward, then they can start using this. Then one thing that's overlooked with EV chargers is maintenance, because as we well know, they're not the cheapest thing in the world. You need to look after them. And even though obviously I've said with the Tritium RT, you don't need that much, in terms of annual maintenance, of course, some of the others you will do, but what if there is an issue? What if there is, an issue where someone has actually driven into it at high speed and knocked it out? That's a massive health and safety issue there with exposed cables. So across obviously our main countries here where we have coverage, so we'll look at the UK on the left-hand side. We have 93 field engineers across the UK. So we can offer genuine full UK coverage. With level 1 engineers, that's basically, they are able to make an immediate attendance and make that area safe. So if there was an issue with, an impact, with some tenders that we've seen before, if something like that happens, people want a 2-hour response time. We can deliver that, and that wouldn't be any issue at all. We've then currently got 10 level 2 engineers. They are then trained to fully service and maintain any EV chargers. And then we have 3 level 3 tech supports. We normally only have 1 per country, but we're a bit greedy in the UK and we've got 3. So they are 3 technical experts and training champions for the country. Then moving forward, why would you look at GVR? Well, we can actually build a complete turnkey solution. We can offer consultancy services. We can liaise with an ICP that we use, which is an independent connection provider. So therefore they can look at the DNO mapping, they can see what powers are, they can determine point of connection, feeder pillar size, and then we can then do a consultancy service to say, look at all the sites and say, right, here's where the power's got to come from, here's where it's going to connect, this is where the equipment's going to be, and this is going to be the cost in order to do it. We can then do some nice diagrams, Google images and so on, and so you can see all of that, and then present that to you. Then obviously carry out installation, operation of those charge points as well, with the call center, with the backup, with the full obviously maintained solution. We can then do AC chargers, DC chargers. We could provide obviously just software on its own. We understand pain points and requirements. We are an approved obviously and trusted partner of multiple people. To give you an idea, it's not that much public knowledge yet, but Shell has probably made the biggest contribution to our EV business so far. They have ordered chargers for the UK and for the Netherlands. The Netherlands, they've already installed 100. The UK, they've got, well, 50 in their warehouse. They've installed 4 so far. Obviously that project's been a bit delayed through COVID, but that is just under a 20 million euro investment with us this year. And obviously with somebody like Shell, they're a global company. They can get anywhere. They can get anywhere to any provider, any supplier in the world. They came to us. There's reasons behind that, of course. And obviously we do have financial strength. You know, we are not a startup. We have not been going 5 years. And obviously, you know, we are a big operation with the staff in order to back that up. And again, we're looking to then expand our portfolio, hopefully Q2 2021 by offering battery energy storage as well. So yeah, we can do a complete thing from A to Z, complete turnkey solution. Doesn't matter how small or how large it is, we can help you, we can deliver it. And that's the end from me. Obviously my contact details are there. If there's anything you need to ask after this, by all means do so. Otherwise, I'm sure hopefully we can share these afterwards. That's me done, John.
Thank you, Graham. And thanks to both of today's sponsors for their presentations. We'll now move on to the panel discussion section of today's webinar. And I'd like to jump right in by quoting some research from the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, which at the time claimed that there were currently just over 19,315 on-street charge points in the UK. Now, Alan has kind of validated that and provided an update in his presentation via ZapMap with the 19,804 charging units currently in the UK. Now, according to the SMMT, that means that there are 2.8 million public chargers needed to achieve the UK government's zero emission capable new car market target. Now, that's equivalent to some 507 on-street chargers needing to be installed every day in the UK from now until 2035 at a total cost of £16.7 billion. Now, I'd like to try and gauge some of your reactions to that, whether or not it's a fair and accurate representation of where things currently stand. Shamala, if I could perhaps start with you and kind of gauge your response to that research.
Yeah, I mean, hi everyone. So I'm not 100% sure that we can just take that statement at face value. I think it needs to be maybe read in conjunction with other news that is reported in the report from where it's come. I'm not 100% sure that it is accurate or it can be construed as accurate, because depending on what context it choose, depending on how many vehicles are currently in the market versus per vehicle per one charger, then I don't think it works like that with electric vehicles. You don't have to charge your vehicle every day and so forth. There are many influencing externality factors involved on how you charge your vehicle. So I'm not 100% sure that it's accurate. Well, I have to read the report actually to make
sure. And thank you, Shamala. Tim, could I get your viewpoint on that, and perhaps looking at kind of what Kent County Council is doing in terms of trying to expand its EV charging infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd actually agree with Shimon. I think argue from our point of view at the moment, the jury's out in terms of what charging will look like in 10 years time, 15 years time, for example. If batteries get an awful lot bigger, will a 7 kilowatt home charger even be that amazing? Would it take 2 or 3 sessions to charge your car? I don't know. I mean, I know that home charging is obviously the number one if you've got a driveway, but there are an awful lot of people without driveways. And that's a lot of chargers you'd have to potentially put on street if you were to go at a low capacity. And we've just heard presentations about ultra rapid chargers and all sorts. And it's a very different model from the petrol station style of refueling a car. And I think we're all, you know, it's a young industry and everybody's trying to sort of foresee where it's going to go. But certainly from a local authority perspective, we're not awash with spare cash at the moment, I think it's fair to say, as all local authorities. So the one thing we can offer is access to land. And I think that really is the role that Kent County Council particularly, and I think lots of local authorities are going down. We do have, well, certainly the districts in Kent have car parks, public car parks, and Kent County Council is the highway authority down here. So there is space, and that sort of link up with the private sector who potentially can provide the solutions, and local authority can provide the land is the answer. We're, just to give a bit of an overview, we're doing different levels of charging. We've got different projects based on different levels of charging. So it's not just a find a petrol station type style location and shove them in. We're looking at, we've got a project at the moment with our parishes to put in sort of slower or fast chargers in more rural communities, which are possibly overlooked generally by the private sector, or will be. We've got that going. We've got a district charger network where we're looking to put out a big contract with over 150 sites, public car parks across Kent and Medway. And that's looking at not only rapid sort of charging hubs where the network allows, but also your sort of overnight charging for those who don't necessarily have driveways, which is really important. From a local authority's perspective, this isn't just about trying to make as much money or, you know, as possible. We've got to think about, there's a VAT issue, my understanding, whereby if you pay, you know, your VAT on your electricity, if you've got a driveway, you pay 5%. If you pay on the public network, you pay 20% VAT. Well, there's an equalities issue there. So the local authorities, we've got to think about everybody who might be using that network. So we've got a range of projects. We've got rapid taxi charger projects, and we're actually looking at land for ultra rapid charging stations to see if we've got any potential land. So we are trying to acknowledge the different levels of charging that might be needed and structure projects accordingly.
Thank you, Tim. During that time, we had a few questions come in along a similar theme, asking, will there be enough charger demand by the industry to keep, is there enough charger availability to keep up with demand as we move forward over the next 5 to 10 years? Perhaps, Graham, you'd like to answer that from the industry's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. What you're tending to see is that people with an EV almost expect to have their own charger with it as well, which is not what you get when you buy a normal traditional ICE car. And I think that's kind of what like Tim was saying. You've got to try and weigh it up on how the difference is. And like, you know, with the previous question, you know, something I was discussing with another guys in the industry the other day on LinkedIn. You know, there's just under 8,500 petrol stations in the country. I would say an average of 12 pumps per petrol station. When do you ever hear people moaning about they don't know where to fuel their car, there isn't enough of them, they need to have 2.5 million of them, and they don't? You don't have that problem. No one complains about it. Don't be wrong. They might be a few miles away from where you are, and it's obviously convenient to have this facility, but not everyone can have that facility. As just, you know, Tim just said, you know, lots of areas in the country with no off-street parking. There's ample power. You know, you talk to Graham Cooper, who's director of National Grid for EV, you know, strategy, and there's easily enough power in there. It's a case of where do you put the chargers? It's nice to have them at home. It's nice to have them obviously in the office, and the flexibility you have with EV chargers, you almost, to a degree, power, you know, depending, can put them anywhere you want to. And that gives you flexibility for it. And it's then a case of what chargers do you put where? And I say, like flicking onto my slide from earlier, it's kind of like, you know, if you've got a retail park, you're probably likely to have, it's easier and cheaper to put in 50 7 kilowatt AC chargers than it would be to put in 5 DC rapid chargers. Same with a supermarket as well. Although you're not going to have the same dwell time there, things will change. We could look at induction charging that's coming. That brings it a bit of tribulations as well. But I think for taxis, induction charging on a taxi rank is perfect because they can just move forward as and when they pick up people outside airports or obviously in the town centre. Absolutely ideal. So I think, I don't see battery sizes getting too larger, because why do you need a battery? It does 1,000 miles. It's going to take you 4 years to charge a thing, regardless of whatever you use. So I think we're kind of a limit of 300 to 500 miles of the battery will be okay. But I don't really see chargers getting too much larger from where they are, because it's about heat. Heat's the issue that cars have. That's why all these cars don't have ultra rapid charging capabilities, because it generates a lot of heat. If you go to a Tesla and want to use ludicrous mode, you have to warm it up. And once you've used ludicrous mode, you have to cool it down. And it's the same thing if you put too much power into it. So that's one of the issues. So if manufacturers can deal with that, we can see more faster chargers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Graham. Now, according to research released by uswitch.com earlier this year, certain cities are better prepared for an uptake in EVs than others, owing to a better provision of EV chargers. Now, within Uswitch's research, Coventry was cited as the city in the last year that had made the biggest increase. It had installed more than 140 new charging stations within the last year, a rise of 293% over the previous year. Shamala, can you explain how it is that Coventry has achieved that and what it's done to get to this point?
Yes, of course. So Coventry has put in a bid to OLEV for taxi infrastructure, for on-street residential charge points. As Tim mentioned, local authorities don't really have a lot of their own cash. And seeing that central government has made funding available for installation of public charging, typically from on-street charge point, residential charge point perspective, it is for the streets where the residents don't have off-street parking facility. So identifying, Coventry has about 46% of households that don't have off-street parking facility. So it wasn't very difficult to identify locations. And we are looking to future-proof it rather than looking to say, which area has got more EVs, because we don't have that many EVs in Coventry, registered in Coventry. So it's a chicken or the egg solution for residents who live on within terrace properties, if you like. So providing charging infrastructure on those streets was the consideration, and that's what we did. I applied for funding and procured a supplier who provided 25% of the investment, where OLEV provides the 75% investment. And we just went ahead and introduced slow, fast, and rapid chargers in the city. So we have rapid chargers are ESB, Siemens ESB chargers. So they are the procured CPO there. And Chargee is our CPO for on-street residential charge points. We also have a small pilot study with the connected curbs, and they are looking at smart cities. So there are 2 or 3 different avenues that we've gone through to increase the infrastructure within the city.
Thank you, Shamala. Sandy, I'd like to kind of look at the London perspective on that. Now, obviously, you're program manager for sharing cities at the Greater London Authority. Can you talk about some of the challenges and maybe kind of what needs to be done in the capital to increase EV charging infrastructure?
Sure. So in London, actually, in terms of electrical vehicle charging points, we are already quite ahead in certain ways. And at the start of 2020, there were almost 5,000 charge points spread out across the city, across our 33 boroughs, one for every 6 electric cars in the capital. And that constitutes 25% of the charging points in the UK at the moment. Although I would say that I think electric vehicles and charging infrastructure is just one solution among a whole suite of policies and actions that the capital is taking to address the greater kind of challenges around climate, reaching our climate targets and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, as well as improving local air quality. And so you have to kind of look at the work that we're doing in increasing the capacity for electrical vehicle charging with our efforts to try to improve local air quality with the ultra low emission zone, and also with reducing basically carbon emissions across the city as a whole, not just with cars, but also mobility as a whole and in buildings. So looking at the city really as a system and how we can move towards a greener agenda. And so that's really kind of been the approach in London. As you know, there sprawling traffic congestion and limited space. So electrification alone isn't going to solve the problem. So we are looking at ways to actually reduce car ownership in general, and also increase alternative modes of transport, including cycling and walking, and using our spaces more efficiently. With regards to the electrical vehicle charging infrastructure with sharing cities, we are, the Greater London Authority is the lead coordinator in a €24.5 million Horizon 2020 program from the European Union. And so we had been testing a range of smart technologies to look at how we can improve the way that the city functions, including with EV charging points, as well as smart lampposts that have the charging capacity and lots of sensors and things like that, to actually be able to monitor for air pollution and traffic congestions and things like that. And part of that has just been a learning journey to understand what works and what doesn't. So in London, our sharing cities testbed is in the Royal Borough of Greenwich. Across the program, we've implemented 311 electrical vehicle charging points, some of them which are integrated into lampposts, and we've also implemented other technologies like smart parking to understand where vehicles are being parked and things like that. And so with this kind of testing program and conducting a demand analysis to understand where residents in our boroughs are actually using these assets, we're gaining this knowledge to understand, how exactly we can improve the charging infrastructure in conjunction with our other policies that we are implementing in London in order to achieve our greater kind of climate goals.
Thank you very much. Kind of sticking momentarily with London, in your experience, Sandy, how can you discuss the relationship, say, between central government, local authorities, and EV charging providers, solution providers, and even energy companies in developing a sufficient and sustainable charging infrastructure? Can you expand on what that looks like, how it works, and what works well and what could be done better?
So I think what's happening right now is that you have the private sector, you have the local councils, and you have central government implementing policies, incentives, and regulations to drive a greater kind of increase towards electrification in general, and to provide that increase that charging capacity. However, I think I would say that right now the picture is sort of fragmented. So every council is trying to achieve these carbon reduction targets targets and increase their charging infrastructure in different ways. And so I would say the main challenge for us to doing this more effectively is that kind of cross collaboration, not only within, across different levels of government, but also across across sectors. So doing more projects like Sharing Cities, where we actually are comprised of a consortium of private sector and public sector partners and academia, I would say, to actually test, design, deploy, and learn from these pilots in order for us to understand what works and what doesn't work, in order that we can actually scale these across not only one borough but across all 33 boroughs. That I think is really the key. And so we are doing more projects like this. The GLA is working with Imperial College on another what we call it, electric vehicle program called eFlex, which is really testing the capacity of vehicle to grid, using electric vehicles as a way to support the management of electrical demand in general. And so testing using programs like these, we're actually working across sectors with businesses and to understand exactly what the market demand is, as well as what kind of regulatory what kind of regulatory policies we can put into place to complement those incentives is, I think, really critical.
Thank you. On that point, Tim and Shamala, I'd be interested to get your perspectives on that, and whether or not you agree or disagree as to whether perhaps more collaboration is needed between government councils. I mean, are cities and counties too siloed when it comes to trying to develop EV charging provision in your own areas that will eventually form the wider national network? Perhaps Tim, we start with you there.
I think it's a strange one, actually, because we so Kent County Council, it's obviously the county authority, but we've got 12 districts, and then there's also Medway, which is a unitary. So for us, in terms of specifically for electric vehicle charging infrastructure, some of the districts, Canterbury, for example, are quite far ahead. They've gone their own way. They've got chargers in. That's absolutely fantastic. There's no reason to sort of try and stop them or pull them back or anything like that. It's a brilliant thing. But some of the other districts are perhaps a bit further behind. So, for example, our district project we're pulling together now is looking at sort of seven or eight of the districts and Medway, pulling them together, and there's 150 sites, and you can procure one contract perhaps. And you would have thought, in principle, that brings efficiencies, but in many ways, it can make things slower as well, because again, you're dealing with a lot more stakeholders who all have have to have a say, because it's their land, and all need legal agreements. And so actually, although it absolutely makes sense that you sort of have one contractor to rule them all, and it all gets done at once, and that's brilliant. There's pros and cons to that. The cons being actually, arguably, if you bring 150 sites together, are you only opening that contract up to really large suppliers? Are you cutting out some of the smaller players who can't necessarily, wouldn't be able to find the capital to fund that if you're going down a concession model, for example, or even supply that? And I think the biggest thing for us, whether you partner up with the district or not, we're finding it's the DNO connections, finding suitable land. We have land around the place, whether it's good for a charging point or not. We may say, oh, the location's brilliant because that's where everyone goes. It's a town centre. Well, we're talking to UKPN a lot, but actually the reality is lots of sites, although they might seem perfect on the surface, actually don't have an awful lot of grid capacity, and there's going to be a lot of money required to install that. So whether you bring the partners together or not, we're actually finding those difficulties are slowing down the process. And one thing I would say, last point, is it would benefit us as a local authority for our end users if there was a bit more unification in terms of the technology and experience of charging. I know all the standards. Essentially, it's a plug and you press a few buttons. But in terms of how you pay for it, I know there are some very recent companies that are trying to bring that together. But the end user, ideally, as Graham sort of alluded to, they don't really mind who's providing the kit or necessarily take much interest, but they want to be able to use it and make it simple. And so that kind of interoperability would be more helpful as a local authority, I suspect, than whether, because actually it means that each district or each authority can just go and procure chargers, but they work exactly the same way across the board, or customers can pay for them easily. That would probably be more helpful, I'd have thought.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you, Tim. Now, Shamala, as we alluded to earlier, Coventry is actually, in a pretty good state at the moment in terms of its provision for EV charging infrastructure. What's your perspective then on whether or not more cross collaboration is needed? I mean, have you achieved that? Has Coventry gone about its own business there and managed to make strides on its own, or did you kind of look outside to other levels of government, or other forms of collaboration with private sector in order to achieve what you've done?
Yeah, we did. I firmly believe that this is only going to happen properly if private and public sector collaborate, because public sector sort of brings, like Tim said, land, regulation, structure to the project or this space, and the private sector brings in all the innovation, to the table, and collaborating together. I mean, I feel that every city, you cannot replicate exactly how you go and deliver the project. I think the requirements are different. I'm finding it even within the city, just Coventry City, which is not a huge city, different areas have got different perspectives and the outlook and perception on what a EV charging bollard or a space taking away from their street constitutes to them. So my consultation with each area has been, the responses. Some things are common, but a lot of things aren't common. So again, Tim mentioned, there is a power supply, the capacity issue. So working together, I think, with DNOs and understanding the skill shortages there as well. So knowing how you need to go and deliver, where are finding good locations is not just it, making sure that there are good locations and there is enough capacity in the grid to provide. Although Graham from National Grid has said a number of times that there is no problem with energy in UK. The problem is the DNO network in UK. So especially in Coventry, we only have a 6.6 kV supply, which is the smallest there is in England, because the other locations or other cities has the base supply is 11 kV. So I have found especially the rapid charger installation process quite challenging. We have had every single location we have had to do reinforcement, and working with ESP has been really good. They are a good partner to have. So collaboration is definitely needed. Did Coventry collaborate with other within West Midlands, other authorities? Yes, West Midland Combined Authority is aware of what Coventry is doing, but there is the procurement processes involved. Cities want to go through their own procurement process, and there isn't a West Midland. There is a West Midland ultra low emission EV strategy, but bringing all the cities together is not that simple. Cities like to do their own things. They want to go and procure their own supplier. Birmingham has done just that. They have just procured ESP as their supplier for, up to 300 odd chargers. So Coventry has got 39 rapid chargers. We've got 60 fast chargers. We've got 140 slow chargers. We are in the process currently of installing further 100 chargers, which the works are going to start in November and they will complete in March. Now we have gone two ways. We've got some charges on lamp columns and some on bollards. And that is primarily because where the bollards are at the back of the footway, we can't have charges on the lamp columns with trailing cables. So wherever we've got that situation, we've installed a bollard, and through the PFI contract for the street light, you know, I would say we've got nearly 77% of our lampposts have been moved to the back of the footway. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, you will see sort of there is a mixture of lamppost charging and bollard charging in Coventry.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Shamala.
If I may briefly,
please do, Alan.
Just to explain the street lighting scenario, that the lamp columns were moved to the back of the pavements because the technology improved, the brightness, the luminancy of the luminaires improved so much that you didn't no longer have to have them at the front of the pavement. You could move them to the back of the pavement, which was great. But then we started considering them being suitable for use for the purpose of EV charging, and then suddenly that was counterproductive, because now you suddenly see this idea that if you're connected in it, you almost have a tripwire going across the pavement, which of course is no good whatsoever to local authorities. So now the idea of using a bollard is another system which is at the front of the pavement, and that's how that came about. And I think Ian has seen that very often in his area, London and the South East.
Yes, I mean, I think people don't want also a bollard or a charging unit outside their house. And from my perspective, it is a question of awareness, not understanding what what it means to have a charge point on your street, for example. I mean, that is what the central government needs, I feel, from their side, is raising awareness with the public. Public don't understand that you don't need to charge your vehicle every day. I mean, from my consultation, nearly like 15 to 20 areas in Coventry, they didn't know that you don't have to charge your, they are like likening the electric vehicle to having iPhones or mobile phones. You have to plug in every day kind of thing. And when I've explained to them that no, you don't have to, because stats show that no, on average, people sort of tend to travel 50 to 70 miles every week. And if you've got even a small battery car, like a Leaf or something like that, you only need to charge once every fortnight or once every 3 weeks, you know. So on a street that has 60 odd houses, having 4 chargers is sufficient for them to be able to charge their vehicles. So this kind of awareness, you know, the way climate change or air pollution is so much now in the forefront with the public, they need to, I don't know, when people are watching television, just one sentence, one liner coming every so often that's saying that, do you know, you don't have to charge your electric car every day, or that kind of promotion and awareness, I think, will help people understand that, you know, it is not that difficult to make that switch. Charging infrastructure is there.
I mean, that's a really interesting point, Shamala, about raising public awareness. And then I wanted to get Sandy's thoughts there. And, do you agree with the point that Shamala's just made, that the government arguably should be doing more to raise awareness on the correct kind of types of EV charging infrastructure required in different types of areas?
Yes, absolutely. I think public awareness is a key component of that. And in order to in order for any new technology to become mainstream, you must explain the benefits and how it can be used to improve your life, to make it, to make your life easier or better. You need to do that in a really clear way. And I think there is there's in the kind of expert circles and industry circles, there's a very good understanding of that. However, that's not, in my view, kind of penetrating the public And so it's it's about really clearly communicating without jargon and in very simple terms how exactly an electric car can help you with your day-to-day life, but also how you can use it and how it's actually easy. It's not like it's not going to be a lot different or difficult to maintain than you would for a normal vehicle. I think unfortunately a lot of people don't know that. And even I think one of the presentations earlier when you showed the different types of charging units for the vehicle, there's so many different kinds depending on which vehicle you own, whether it's a European car or a Japanese car. I think to a consumer that can be quite intimidating, and unless you are an expert or one of the early adopters who really knows everything about the newest technologies, I think the common consumer might be a little bit afraid to take that next step because they don't know whether they are able to manage this kind of new technology, even if the capacity is there, even if the city has the infrastructure for you to do it. So I absolutely agree. I think some very clear messaging and engagement is probably needed, both from the central government, local authorities, but also from the private sector. When you're selling your vehicle, you need to be able to sell it and use the language that your consumers can understand. So I think that's definitely a big part of it.
Now, Graham and Alan, are your products intimidating to the consumer in terms of understanding, or do you disagree with that?
I think the whole thing can be, but it also depends on, with all due respect to some local authorities, they sometimes don't have someone who can take control of that process. I've spoken to one local authority who has the person looking after their cycle pass taking care of EV because they're considered both to be green. And you can't really necessarily say that person has got, it's no disrespect to them, they might be perfectly qualified, but it's kind of like, how do you learn and who do you learn it from? Because you're going to talk to one person who says, well, our charger's the best thing since sliced bread, you need this in your life, it does this, 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 and this. Do you actually need that? And you've got other people saying that. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes from, which is why people get afraid of it, because they talk to one company who tells them this, they talk to another company who tells them something slightly different. We did a tender recently with a big fuel chain, and they got back like 11 responses, and all it said was, they're all different, but they shouldn't be. It should be the same. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes from. And then the drivers don't know what to do either. Like, we were just saying, Shamala was just saying, people don't realize, hey, you only do 7 to 15 miles a day. You do not need to charge every day. Why are you worried about that? My mum did the same thing. She was like, I can't buy an electric car. Why not? She goes, I go to Maidstone once a month. So, you can get there and back. You don't need to worry about it. It's not a problem. It's just trying to instill that confidence. And I agree with what everyone said. But the only thing I'd add to that is that, being a former car salesman, I'm sorry, information needs to come from them as well. The amount of time you can walk into a showroom, I've done it recently, and they do not talk about charging. They do not tell you what to do. I think that's a big barrier for people. If they felt a bit more at ease when they're going to go and look at the cars, they'll feel more comfortable in purchasing. And
John, can I just come in for a second?
The
central, the local authority and them talking to people. I think that this needs to come more from on a national level rather than just local level. Also with the local authorities, communication, it tends to be 9 times out of 10 a reactive process. So they are constantly reacting to what is going on with the members and the public's, backlash, if you like, with whatever is happening in their city, rather than looking proactively, trying to look at, because they don't also have resources or budget to do something like this. I feel very strongly that you need to have events arranged where you ask people to come, EV events, once a year, a big one, something becomes like a massive thing, that it's not enough. There is so much material available on the internet about it. We have got our own plugincoventry.org website for the constituents to have a look at, but they don't. They don't go on the internet to have a look. So either you hold an event where you do sort of like a face-to-face banners and that kind of things, and that all costs. And local authority don't tend to have money like that. So national government either, but no, it does need to come nationally, not just locally.
On that though, I mean, Alan, do you think there's possibly an opportunity for industry to take a lead there and also help imbue more knowledge to the general public?
The industry certainly can have a role to play in bringing that across to the general public. But what I did want to say, John, was that I think in some cases the local authorities have still an unawareness as to what they're taking on when they take on an EV charging project. What I mean by that is, and I was trying to put that across in the presentation, that it's highly likely that you're going to need some sort of feeder pillars. So some of your local authorities, they know they need an EV charger and they know where they want to be, but there's hasn't been a lot of consideration made as to how am I actually going to get that electrical supplier to those EV charging, and the feeder pillar is part of that. And what I was trying to show before was that some of them can be quite substantial in size, and then the challenge then is where are we actually going to be able to put that, where we'll be able to integrate that into that particular area, and then of course you're up against the people that live there as to whether that is going to be acceptable to them. So those are sort of challenges that we face when trying to bring across that information to those local authorities. Also, a point that Graham touched on earlier on, you're very often talking to people in local authorities. They aren't necessarily your EV charger expert that maybe, or they're on a very sharp learning curve, because they could perhaps be double-hatted. They could be street lighting, and now they've been given that additional responsibility of taking on that EV charging project as well. So it's for us to talk to those people and try and help them to have a better understanding of the overall infrastructure and how that project could progress forwards in the future.
Thank you, Alan. Tim, interested to get your view there on what Alan's mentioned. In Kent, do you feel that within the county-council structure, you do have those experts that are required to kind of help make the key decisions in terms of when choosing an EV charging solution as part of a wider project?
I think everything everyone has said is definitely correct. I mean, and I'd say local authorities some are better than others, I suppose. In Kent, we've essentially it's fallen to my team and to another team, and I say that is the reality. In the last couple of years, it has fallen to a team, and it's exactly as Alan describes it. In other authorities, it might, or Graham's saying, it might be a cycle person, it might be a street lighting or whatever. And there's a big question about, we as local authorities, we certainly have an air quality goals. It's the health well-being of our communities, and that's definitely something we need to achieve. And however, it's I think there's a question about how much of a role or how little of a role local authorities will be or should be expected to bring this big solution, because I don't know. I mean, supermarkets, for example, a big supermarket, I know lots of them have deals to put them in. We could spend quite a long time working on an on-street solution that we've got to deal with all the parking permits and all the, and all the costs that necessarily comes with that, with possibly not an awful lot of revenue return to local authority, which is absolutely fine if that's the local authority's priority. But I have to say, with the COVID situation, possibly there are, more important priorities potentially, certainly imminently, that might need that funding, and that's a political decision, and that's a really difficult one for them to do. But a supermarket can come along and put in 50 charges or 30 charges, and then in one hit. So there's a big question. If central government say this is absolutely down to local authorities to solve this problem or open up the land, the grants, the OLEV grants are definitely helpful, and there's a lot of, there's 20 million this year for the on-street charging fund, which we're going for as well. But it doesn't necessarily bring It doesn't mean that local authorities necessarily have the expertise, the time, resource. And actually, there's still also a question I have to throw out there about ongoing maintenance. Local authorities don't have, generally, as a highway authority, we don't have an awful lot of spare cash, as I've said, and maintaining the assets we have at the moment is a struggle. So taking on automatically being the assumption that local authorities should be installing 1 million streetlight chargers and then maintaining those forevermore, even if you can get an OLEV grant or get them funded up front, that's great. But what happens in 10 years' time when that kit's obsolete, or in 5 years? It's not for me to answer. It's a bigger question. Is this something local authorities are supposed to do? And if it is, and if that's what central government wants, then I'm certainly not trying to make a political statement, but this needs to be considered about the ongoing maintenance as well. So I would fully agree. Local authorities are doing their very best with the resources they have, but
Can I just add to that point? I think that's a really important, I think that's really, really critical. I think that the operation and maintenance aspect is often kind of not considered right up front. But I think to the larger point about, focusing on street and charging infrastructure for residents, in a place like London, you do understand that most people don't live in car parks, don't live in places where there are car parks, and so they can do kind of parking on private land. So it has to be kind of, we're looking at on-street charging. However, there's arguably a bigger opportunity to actually electrify municipal and corporate fleets. So if you're talking about buses and taxis and municipal fleets, so looking at logistical vehicles as well, and your Amazon delivery trucks, there's a much bigger market there for electrification. And I think there should be a conversation about the electrification and charging infrastructure for those types of vehicles. If you're talking about installing chargers in depots and in private places, and so it's not just about on-street parking. And I think if you're looking at that as a bigger picture, as a local authority, there are opportunities, for us to kind of work with those stakeholders to install charging infrastructure in those areas as well. And so kind of relieving a little bit of a pressure on looking at on-street charging.
To be honest,
can I come in as well?
Oh, sorry.
Just one more, just quickly. Just to answer Tim, the maintenance side of it. So what Coventry did was, right at the beginning, the contracts with these operators, CPOs, there are long-term contracts. So they're not 2 or 3 year contract, they're 10, 15-year contract, 10-year contracts. And maintenance is included in that. So they will maintain the asset until for the duration of that contract. So as you come nearer to that contract, so what we have also done is we've got a universal foundation. We worked with NAL to get that foundation so that when we come for the next contract, so the above the ground, because we've had the 75% funding from OLEV, everything underground is Coventry City Council's asset. Everything above ground is the CPO's asset, because they have invested 25% in there. So at the end of the term of contract, they take away their asset without disrupting the highway, if you like, or public land. And the new contractor comes in with a similar operation and maintenance contract in place. So the City Council does not have the responsibility of maintaining those assets, although they are on the City Council land. We've also worked on revenue share, so they are concession contracts, So you can look at the full life cycle of operation of that particular charging unit from the beginning to the end, without the council incurring costs on that. I just thought I'll mention that.
Thank you, Shamala. I think Graham, did you have a point there?
I just said two. So one to Sandy there. Okay. We are working with a couple of OEMs in terms of buses and vans, and they are actually looking to procure infrastructure to sell with the vehicle, because from their perspective, If they say, look, hey, if you're buying this bus or you're buying this electric light commercial van, this is the charge that comes with it, because we've done the testing, we know it works, we know it's not going to be a problem, and therefore, with all due respect, we're not going to let you get the wrong thing and put that in the ground. So that might, again, help you take some of that away. And also to Shamala's point there about the, you know, some of the CPOs obviously maintaining that. The only thing I would say that the council should have a responsibility for, my first company I worked for within the EV industry, we took over the Source East contract, which was one of the original OLEV contracts put in across the east side of the country. There was also Source West. Different companies won each contract initially. And for example, in Source West, even though they said we're going to install it, maintain it, it's ours, we'll keep it working, they only put in 15 chargers, and this was shown on BBC, it's not my information. Only 3 worked at any one time. I've spoken to a local port recently in Southampton. They've got some chargers, and they said, look, we've got some, they all work in, it's all great. You go onto ZapMap, they've been out of order for 6 months. They had no idea. So even though a CPO might say they will maintain it, I still think that the council should, only suggesting obviously, still keep an eye on, is that still going ahead? You know, yours is probably, you know, because yours is more of an example, it's probably looked after very, very well. But there are others, you know, I can point you to a bit further north up the country who have certain issues, and that's why they're looking to replace them all at the moment. Not by us. It's all, you know, nothing to do with me basically. But yeah, it's just keep an eye on it basically. Is all I'm saying. Sorry.
There are KPIs in place, Graham.
Good.
We are keeping an eye.
Good.
Thank you. Looking just to kind of progress discussion on a little bit on from maintenance. If we are looking to achieve what central government wants, i.e. A phase out on the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles, new petrol and diesel vehicles by 2035, is that in itself enough of an incentive to accelerate the rollout of EV charging infrastructure? Would anyone like to take a stab at that first, or shall I pick one of you?
I think that's a start.
Mm-hmm.
2035. I mean, it is not just it's across the sector within the transport industry, and you can see the impetus with the larger vehicles as well. The bus industry, public transport sector, also looking at electrification. We have so Coventry has got National Express is the biggest operator in Coventry, and they already have said that by 2025 they will go all electric. Mm-hmm. Now National Express doesn't just operate in Coventry; it is an international company, and that is their business case. You know, there are other bus operators who have also pledged. So when you look at what the OEMs are also saying, you know, that is a start. Is that enough? I'm not really sure.
Tim, can I get your perspective on that?
I think, well, actually, yeah, it's the 2030 date that seems to be thrown around. So it could well be less than 10 years. But I think the biggest it's definitely it's carrot and stick, isn't it? I think reality is that probably car manufacturers will may well increase the number of vehicles they're manufacturing, but to the consumer, it's always the incentives of convenience and cost. And when the cars themselves become lower or more parable cost to internal combustion engine, I think that will have a bigger driver. They'll see it coming, but reality is people still need to be able to afford the vehicles if they've got to have a vehicle, and the charging has to keep up with that. I'm not sure. I think it's one of a series of measures, I suspect, that will help it. It means it shows some serious intent, I think, and it sends a message out not only to the manufacturers but to the public, local authorities, and everyone in the chain that is going to happen. So do something about it.
Mm-hmm. And Alan and Graham, from industry's perspective, when you read or hear that government is saying no more new petrol diesel vehicles by 2035 or even 2030, if that comes to be, do your ears kind of prick up, and do you see that as a positive opportunity for yourselves?
Yes and no. Sorry, Alan, to jump in. I mean, echoing Tim's point, it's all well and good them saying that, but Tim made a very good point there, that it's about cost. And as well as you can look at total cost of ownership, not that most car buyers do, businesses do by all means, and they see that EVs are lower. Normal car buyers don't bother doing that. They just look at, well, hang on a minute, if my diesel Golf is 18 grand, my electric Golf is 30 grand, I'm buying a diesel. They don't think that diesel's still, £1.15 a litre to fill up, and how much extra that's going to cost them over the term, also with the maintenance and servicing as well. I think we could learn a little bit from Germany. Germany have just done a far bigger incentive. You can get 9,000 euros basically towards a car, and that then makes cost parity almost straight away. Again, if you look at that, say, Golf scenario, it's one of the most popular cars in the UK, it pretty much makes them the same price, and then therefore that opens people's eyes a little bit. And the last thing I think they can do is it's actually the finance companies. So there's a hell of a lot of cars sold on finance now, and it's all based on like the guaranteed future value in 2, 3 or 4 years time, and hybrids and EVs are so much lower, and it makes them really expensive. If you want to look at a £40,000 BMW 3 Series, you can buy that for £399 a month. You look at a £40,000 Tesla Model 3, which is faster, quicker, way obviously more efficient, and so on. That's £702 a month, £300 a month more. And that's very difficult to try and justify that extra £300. Just to say, I appreciate you want to save the planet and everything, but of course, going into the real world and talking to normal people, can they justify another £300 a month for that? Are they going to save £300 a month on fuel? Probably not. But it's all because that residual value is so much lower. So I think, the finance companies need to try and step that up a little bit and realise what the market is changing and how it's going to make it easier for people to purchase the cars.
Thanks, Alan. Don't know if you had a view on that.
Yes, I do, and I think Ian will back me up on this. That what we've seen ourselves in the street lighting industry is that the local authorities just don't have that budget that they maybe were used to before, because of the current financial situation that we're in. The local authorities have to make cuts wherever they can, and very often, I'm afraid to say, that the street lighting is sometimes hit quite hard. So I think the question in my mind is where is that money going to come for to be able to achieve that? I've also touched on what Shamala said. The likes of National Express to actually make a statement, a bold statement, that they're actually going to have their vehicles electrified. I think we're going to look at the bigger players within industry, the Amazons and the big supermarket chains. I think if they're able to make similar statements with their own vehicles, delivery vehicles, maybe not the big articulated vehicles, but the smaller delivery vehicles, then I think that would make a big statement to the general public as to it's starting to become the norm. And I think it would make it more acceptable in their eyes to actually then seriously consider to do it themselves. But Ian, what do you think about street lighting where we are?
Yeah, a similar sort of thing, really. One question this does bring up: when new electric vehicles are sold, is there a central database where all that information? Because there might be an influx of vehicles being sold in maybe Kent or Coventry. Do we know actually? Because if there's a sudden surge of vehicles in one of those areas, for example, so planning can go further forward in that area rather to another area where they might not be selling very many at all. Is there a database in place?
Yeah, you can get it. I don't know how, but you can get it.
Yeah.
My previous company used to be able to look at that and look at an area and work out how much EV adoption was in that area. Also look at traffic flow information as well, and try and pick, like, in terms of like site locations, how much EV adoption's there, what's the traffic flow in that location, therefore is that a good site, yes or no? But I'll be honest with you, I can't remember where they got it from, but it is out there.
Yeah. It was just on the delivery address, really, of where the vans or cars were going, because there will be areas, there'll be a certain difference between areas, but okay.
when we look at an overview of different EV charging solutions that are being installed in cities across the UK, there are obviously varying requirements for different cities, and there is no one size fits all solution. So I guess maybe this is more directed at Graham and Alan and Ian again, but so what do you consider when you are approaching or working with a county or a city, knowing that your solution maybe necessarily isn't going to be the be-all and end-all solution for that place? Is that something that you do think about before you start working with these entities?
I'm pleased to say that when I think about Highways England, that they aren't just looking at the main motorway routes and roads throughout the country. They are looking at the smaller back roads as well. I mean, I'm aware of a couple of projects down here in the Southampton, Romsey area where you can go to some very rural areas, and Highways England are actually behind the installation of those EV charging points out in the sticks. And that's good to see, because obviously, there is the main focus on the cities, there's the main focus on service stations, and that's important. But I think equally important, if we're going to sell the idea and make it more acceptable to the general public to consider buying those electric vehicles, even those people living out in the countryside need to find somewhere they can actually plug into. So that's good news that Highways England are on board with that and is pushing that through.
And Graham, similarly to you, you have a raft of solutions there, but when you are in discussions with a city or a local authority, are you acutely, how aware are you that your solution might just form one small part of a wider kind of network of solutions? And is that are you okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to look at the bigger picture. And it's also about, that local authority has probably got a hell of a lot of stuff that they need to do. They've got a hell of a lot of targets and areas where they need to work towards, which, I wouldn't want to do that job with all due respect. It'd be a lot on my shoulders. But how can you actually help them and help streamline that? We've heard a few people say today, talking to DNOs directly, and there's 13 DNOs in the country and they don't have accurate mapping on what's on all their cables. So therefore, you can actually use alternative providers to that, which can work a lot faster. And a local authority has a great knowledge of their area, where they think chargers could go. Also, likewise, what other CPOs are in that area. So therefore, do they want to compete with them or not, or go to something different? And then what I would say is, we'd almost look at it as a consultative approach first. And look at those areas and go to our colleagues and say, right, these are the areas we're looking at. Are there power? If so, where can we connect? How much is it going to cost? What's available? Go or no go? And try and feed that information back in order to help them, because as I say, they've got a lot on their plate. We've already discussed, obviously, with everybody today that it might be somebody who's having to learn this from scratch in the first place. And it's, for lack of a better analogy, it's a bit of hand-holding to try and show, look, this is how you can make it easier. This is how a solution could look like, or how a solution could work. If you want to go with us, it's going to cost you this. If you want to go with somebody else, it might cost you more, it might cost you less. There's pros and cons to all of it. But I think, I've lost plenty of business before to, going to a council and then saying, hey, this is how you can do it. And they say, that's great, but we've now got to procure 2 others, and someone comes in cheaper and they go with them. That's the cost of doing business sometimes, but they'll still remember you to help them out in the first place, and you never know what referrals you can get. So I think for the greater good and the benefit of the country, you've got to do what you can.
Mm-hmm. Sure, thank you. During the course of the session, I received what appears to be like a draft kind of report here from local council on the kind of evaluation criteria and weightings when they're looking at a EV charging project, and 20% look at quality when it comes to waiting for bid evaluation, and 80% consider price. Now, with that in mind, does the panel think that such weighting should be on price as opposed to quality and reliability, remembering that to an EV driver, having charge points operational is crucial to them. And maybe we can start with our public sector panelists. Tim, do you have a view on that point?
I do. And the ones we are drafting at the minute have more of a focus, more of a focus on quality, I suppose. We've heard horror stories, I suppose, and as the industry matures a bit, I think you probably hear more about maybe some of the early adopters and contracts sort of falling by the wayside, or companies being bought out and maybe losing enthusiasm, and actually having those having reliability is very important. I mean, the context of local authorities, I guess, is it depends how you're structuring the contract, because if it's a concession contract, I suppose in price you're really asking what the revenue share might be back to the local authority, assuming that the maintenance and everything else is fantastic. But there is still the issue that, we can have KPIs and things like that, but ultimately, if there's no money changing hands from the local authority to the provider, then the provider could go bust or whatever, or be bought out or lose interest, decide there's no money to be made, and it's very difficult what can we necessarily recoup. So yes, I think it is probably, I can understand why it is based on price if that is something local authority are paying for. If you go down a concession model, then arguably it's more about quality for us. It depends how you're structuring it, and what the ultimate aim of the local authority is. Is it in desperate straits, so it needs to generate as much income as it possibly can? Are they seeing it as an income generation thing, which dubious as to whether, the issue we have as local authorities is, which may be different. Suppliers are very interested, generally very interested in putting in charges in highly profitable locations where there are loads of EV drivers and that loads of people will come by. They lose interest where there's less demand. But as a local authority, we can't just leave black spots in areas where the suppliers won't make so much money. So, that naturally affects the commercial offer that will become available. If we're insisting that suppliers take on less profitable sites, well, that's going to affect the income that comes back to the local authority. And those are the sorts of decisions that the local authority has to weigh up. And often it's political.
Sure. Thank you, Tib. Shamala, also, equally, to you, when Coventry City Council puts out a tender for EV charging, is the weighting more so on price than it is on quality, or is there more of a balance? Oh, I think you're on mute there, Shamala. If you could just unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yes. Always happens.
That's right.
Yes, no, I think it has been on quality, because the funding was. I can see why that imbalance is there if the local authority has to spend the money. Is the justification, is the public purse and so forth, accountability and so forth. But because this is a concession, like Tim said, concession contract, the quality was had more weighting. It was more 60-40 that we went with. But again, I'm not aware of many local authorities who are spending their own money installing charge points. So either it becomes a concession, a fully funded, something that the private sector is working with them, or it is through the OLEV grant or something like that the local authority is going ahead. There are very few local authorities who have got the cash for this. That's my understanding. And when you are looking at working collaboratively, then quality is more important.
Okay, thank you. Conscious of the time, I would just like to kind of wrap up this webinar by kind of circling back to the, with the main kind of theme of this session. I know we've discussed a lot and we've kind of, really got into the weeds. Very quickly, and I pose this to all of our panelists today. Alan, if I can start with you, it's the same question for all of you. Quite quickly, do you think, are we in a position to have a sufficient and robust EV charging infrastructure by 2035 when we're looking to phase out these fossil fuel vehicles?
I think we've learned enough lessons by now, going back to 2010 when it all began. I think we've now got enough knowledge and experience behind us now, within the consultants, within the manufacturers, to have the necessary designs and hardware in place to achieve that. What's now needed is that funding, and it's the funding being pushed to the local authorities, and the local authorities to then pull that on board. So I think from the industrial side, we're ready to take it on, but we just need that drive now from local authorities.
Same question to you, Graham. Will we get there by 2035? Will we have that infrastructure?
Yeah, I don't see why it can't be done. It's just, I think a few people now are still sitting there saying, well, look, EV adoption's not great. We don't need to worry about it yet. We'll do it in 2, 3, 4 years' time. But then that's where there'll be less power and less locations, and it'll be more expensive for them to buy. So again, you know, it's been used several times today, chicken and egg thing. So I think the quicker we can get it in, the better prepared we will be.
Thank you. Shamala?
Just one word, yes. I think we can.
Brilliant. I like the optimism. And to you, Tim?
I think if we, not that I want to move everything away from local authority, but if the private sector, workplaces, schools, destination charging, and the local authority all have a big push, then I think we've got an awful lot better chance to do it. If we are literally relying on local authorities, some areas will be fantastic, some will get left behind unless it becomes a statutory obligation. I think we have to look at, this isn't petrol charging or diesel charging, so we have to look at, as the government is building regulations, every workplace, should all their car parks be using, and therefore do you need such a big public network? If every workplace, supermarket, all those destinations have them as well, as a sort of multi-pronged attack, then I'd say yes.
Thank you. And Sandy, the final word is with you on this. 2035 EV charging infrastructure, will it be sufficient?
So I think yes, based on everybody else's comments, but also if we work on this in conjunction with other policies to kind of reduce overall car ownership and not just look at the consumer market, but also look at other sectors when you're looking at the municipal and corporate fleets, and look at this as a kind of big push to decarbonize in general. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this webinar. I'd just like to thank all of our panelists for taking the time to join us for today's discussion. With particular thanks going to our sponsors, Charles Endirect and Jobako Vida-Roots. Given the quite amazing level of demand to participate in today's session, we will be looking to host another EV charging webinar next month. And then that will be followed by a series of regional focused webinars taking a closer look at what's happening in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and even the Republic of Ireland. Solution providers interested in sponsoring any of those sessions, please contact Robert Googe on 020 8065 0465. Likewise, end users interested in speaking can contact me, John Thornton, on 020 8037 1783. Finally, don't forget that a recording of this webinar will be available to view at citymagazine.co.uk from tomorrow, in case you'd just like to refer back to the discussion or share it with a colleague who couldn't make it. And of course, there will be a write-up based on today's webinar in the upcoming November issue of City Magazine. That's it. Thank you all for attending today's webinar, and I look forward to seeing you all again at the next one. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.